The trauma bay doors burst open at 2:17 a.m. A gunshot victim, arterial bleed, screaming family, security shouting over each other. In the corner of the room, the OR assistant stood still. No one looked at him. He was the quiet one, the one who passed instruments, the one interns joked about, the one patients never remembered. "Stay out of the way," a senior nurse snapped as chaos swallowed the room. Then the lights flickered. Outside, the sound came low at first, distant, mechanical, wrong for a hospital rooftop. The windows trembled. Someone ran in from the corridor, pale. "There's a military helicopter landing on the roof." Laughter broke out, nervous, disbelieving. "Wrong building," someone muttered. But when the intercom crackled and a controlled voice requested clearance for their tactical lead, every eye slowly turned toward the silent assistant. They had been wrong. The operating room ran on rhythm. Monitors pulsed in steady intervals. Ventilators exhaled in measured sighs. Stainless steel trays reflected the white ceiling lights in sharp lines. He stood at the back table, aligning instruments in perfect parallel rows. Scalpel, forceps, needle driver, suction tip. Every tool faced the same direction, every handle positioned for immediate transfer. No one asked him to do it that way. They simply expected it. "Clamp," the surgeon said without looking. The instrument was already in the air before the word finished. The assistant did not rush. He did not hesitate. His movements were precise, economical. No wasted motion, no noise. He never made eye contact longer than necessary. To most of the staff, he was part of the furniture. A background presence in blue scrubs. Someone once described him as efficient but forgettable. He did not respond. The surgery lasted 3 hours. A ruptured spleen from a vehicle collision, blood loss heavy, family crying in the waiting area. Inside the room, tension rose and fell in waves. He did not ride the waves. His breathing stayed steady. Inhale 4 counts, hold, exhale 4, a habit. At 3:12 a.m. the patient stabilized. The surgeon stepped back first. "Good work, everyone." He removed his gloves and left before the final sutures were complete. The assistant stayed. He always stayed. He cleaned the site, checked sponge counts twice, reconfirmed instrument inventory even though the circulating nurse had already logged it. He noticed things others missed: a slightly misaligned tray, a loose wheel on the anesthesia cart, a blind spot in the overhead camera near the supply cabinet. He corrected what he could. He remembered what he could not. Outside the OR, the hallway hummed with fluorescent fatigue. Night shift voices were softer, slower. 2 residents leaned against the wall reviewing scans on a tablet. "That assistant guy," one muttered. "Does he ever talk?" The other shrugged. "I don't think he has a personality." They laughed quietly. He walked past them carrying sterilization bins. He did not react. Inside the sterile processing room, he locked the door behind him, not fully, just enough to control the hinge. He removed his gloves and washed his hands slowly. 20 seconds, nails, thumbs, wrists. He dried them and studied his reflection in the stainless steel cabinet. No expression. A nurse entered without knocking. "Room 3 needs turnover, and try to move faster this time." Her tone carried impatience more than authority. He nodded once. Yes, one word. Calm. He followed her down the corridor. Security stood near the elevator, scrolling through a phone. The badge clipped to the guard's chest was angled incorrectly, obscuring the barcode. The assistant noticed. He always noticed. The trauma pager sounded overhead. Incoming. Gunshot wound. ETA 5 minutes. The hallway shifted instantly. Nurses moved with urgency. Orderlies cleared space. A crash cart rolled into position. He did not run. He positioned. He relocated 2 4 stands closer to the trauma bay entrance. He adjusted the lighting above the central table before anyone requested it. He moved a supply bin 6 inches to the left. When the patient arrived, chaos followed. Blood on the gurney. Family screaming in the corridor. Police officers speaking over each other. The attending physician barked instructions. "Where is suction?" It was already in the assistant's hand. More gauze, already open. Pressure here. He applied it without being told twice. The room narrowed to function. Time became mechanical. He tracked everything. Who entered, who exited, which officer carried a sidearm on the left hip, which one kept. Glancing toward the hallway, the patient survived the first hour. Transferred to emergency surgery. In the brief pause before transport, a junior nurse exhaled shakily. "I hate nights like this." He said nothing. He adjusted the patient's oxygen mask and secured the tubing so it would not snag on the doorframe. Small things prevented bigger problems. That was his role. After surgery near dawn, the hospital settled into exhausted quiet. He stood alone in the corridor for a moment, listening. Hospitals never truly slept. There was always a machine breathing for someone, always a heart fighting to continue. Footsteps approached from behind. Dr. Kessler, Chief of Surgery. You, the doctor said, as if recalling a name he never used. You did fine tonight. Fine, not good, not necessary, fine. The doctor hesitated. For an assistant. Then he walked away. The assistant remained still. Compliments were irrelevant. Insults were irrelevant. Only outcomes mattered. At 6:40 a.m., shift change began. Day staff entered with fresh energy and coffee cups. Night staff prepared to disappear. In the locker room, he folded his scrubs with deliberate care. No wrinkles. He placed them into his bag. Inside the bag, beneath ordinary items, sat a small black notebook, unmarked. He did not open it there. He waited until he reached the hospital parking structure, level 3, corner space near the exit ramp. He sat inside his vehicle but did not start the engine. Instead, he opened the notebook. Handwritten entries filled the pages. Dates, times, observations, camera angle discrepancy, corridor C, 2 degrees off alignment, security response time, average delay 47 seconds after alert, unfamiliar. Our visitor, male, mid-40s, asking about restricted patient 2 days prior. He wrote a new entry. Gunshot patient. Possible gang affiliation. 2 officers. 1 nervous. 1 detached. He closed the notebook. His phone vibrated. Unknown number. He did not answer. It stopped after 2 rings. A message followed. Stand by. No signature. He deleted it. He started the engine and drove away. Back inside the hospital, rumors circulated about the quiet assistant. Some said he was former military, others said he simply lacked ambition, a few believed he was afraid of responsibility. No one asked him, he never volunteered. The truth remained contained. Later that afternoon he returned for another shift. He arrived 15 minutes early. He walked the corridors once before clocking in, not aimlessly, observing. He paused near the main entrance. A delivery van idled longer than necessary. Driver avoided eye contact. He memorized the license plate. Inside, he passed the security desk, the same guard, badge still misaligned. He adjusted it gently without speaking. The guard blinked in confusion. Thanks. He nodded once and continued walking. In or for, an elective procedure waited. Routine, predictable, safe. He prepared the instruments, aligned, measured, controlled. To everyone else, he was invisible. A silent assistant, a background figure in a loud profession. But beneath the calm posture and steady hands lived something else. Discipline carved over years, training that never left the body, a mind that assessed threats automatically. He did not seek recognition, he did not seek command, he simply remained ready. And no one in that hospital understood why. Hospitals speak in patterns. The assistant understood that long ago. Monitors beep in rhythm. Elevators open and close in cycles. Security rounds repeat at predictable intervals. Even panic follows structure. When something shifts, even slightly, it stands out. That morning it was the cameras. He noticed it while pushing a supply cart past corridor C. The small dome camera near the medication storage room, angled 2 degrees lower than usual, most would not see it. He did. The lens reflected more ceiling tile than hallway. A blind spot widened just enough for someone to stand unseen. He stopped only for a second, then continued walking. Inside the OR, a knee reconstruction was underway. Controlled, routine, blood minimal, conversation light. The senior nurse whispered to another. Night shift looked rough. He passed a retractor without looking up. His mind remained elsewhere. 2 degrees was not accidental. Cameras do not shift on their own without vibration or contact. There had been no construction in that wing, no maintenance request. He finished the procedure, completed counts, and stepped into the hallway. Security stood near the nurse's station. Different guard this time, younger, new badge. The assistant approached calmly. Camera in corridor C appears misaligned, he said. The guard frowned. Your maintenance? No, then don't worry about it. The assistant held eye contact for half a second longer than usual, not confrontational, measured. It creates a blind spot. The guard shrugged. I'll log it. He would not. The assistant nodded once and walked away. Logging, it was not the point. Awareness was, later that afternoon, a man entered through the main lobby, mid-40s, clear. Jacket. Calm posture. He did not move like a visitor. He moved like someone mapping space. The assistant noticed him from the far end of the corridor. The man approached the information desk. "Which floor is Daniel Vescari on?" The name meant nothing to the receptionist. She typed into her system. "There's no one registered under that name." The man did not argue. He smiled slightly, perhaps under protective admission. The receptionist stiffened. "We cannot discuss patient status." The man thanked her politely and walked away. Too calm, too specific. The assistant watched him enter the elevator. He memorized the floor selection. 3, surgical recovery. 10 minutes later, the assistant walked towards surgical recovery carrying a clipboard he did not need. On floor 3, he moved without hurry. He passed room 312. Police posted outside. The gunshot victim from the previous night, Daniel Vescari, now the name matched. The assistant continued, walking. He did not look at the officers. He looked at the reflections in the glass behind them. No visitor approached, but the air shifted. Something tightened. Inside the supply closet, he checked his watch. He counted 30 seconds, then stepped back into the corridor. The elevator doors opened. The same man stepped out. No visitor badge, no hesitation. He approached the officers casually. "I'm a cousin," the man said softly. "Just arrived from out of town." One officer checked his tablet. "No visitors authorized." The man's expression did not change. "I understand." He stepped back without argument. That was wrong. Most family members push, beg, cry. This one assessed. As he turned, his eyes briefly met the assistant's. "Recon." Ishan flickered. Not personal, situational. The man left. The assistant waited 5 minutes before speaking to the charge nurse. "That patient requires restricted access confirmation," he said evenly. She looked tired. "There are already officers posted." He nodded. "Yes." She returned to her paperwork. He said nothing more. But that evening, he repositioned a medication cart near room 312. Not obvious. Just enough to create a physical barrier between the doorway and the corridor's direct line of sight. Small changes. Defensive geometry. At 1940, the police rotation changed. 2 new officers. One adjusted his holster nervously every few minutes. The other kept glancing at his phone. Discipline inconsistent. The assistant catalogued it silently. At 21:05, a system alert flashed briefly on a wall monitor near the nurse's station. Access panel malfunction. Stairwell B. Cleared within seconds. Too fast. He walked towards stairwell B casually, holding a tray of saline bags. The access panel showed no error. But the screws on the casing bore fresh marks, subtle scratches. Someone had opened it recently. He touched the metal, still warm. He did not call security, not yet. Instead, he returned to the OR wing. During a brief lull, a junior resident joked, "If something crazy ever happened here, we'd all panic." The room chuckled. The assistant adjusted a light. "Panic wastes time," he said quietly. The resident blinked. That was intense. He did not respond. At midnight, the hospital quieted again. The assistant stood alone near the central corridor. He closed his eyes briefly, listened, footsteps above, elevator cables shifting, air circulation, normal, then a delivery entrance. E-door closed harder than necessary. Metal against frame. He opened his eyes. The security feed near the desk flickered for half a second, short enough to dismiss, long enough to conceal movement. He walked to the desk. The guard yawned. "Long night." "Yes," the assistant replied. He leaned slightly to observe the monitor. Camera had a brief timestamp gap. 7 seconds. 7 seconds in a hospital is long. "Did anyone enter through receiving?" he asked. The guard shrugged. "Just routine shipments. What shipment?" The guard hesitated. "I'd have to check." The assistant nodded and stepped back. He did not press. Pressure reveals interest. Interest draws attention. Instead, he returned to surgical prep and began rearranging instrument trays. He changed nothing visible. Only proximity, only angles. He moved a heavy stainless steel cart closer to the corridor intersection. He ensured crash carts were fully stocked. He replaced expired batteries in 2 portable monitors without being asked, preparedness without announcement. At 2:03 a.m., his phone vibrated again. Unknown number. He stepped into an empty locker room before answering. He did not speak first. A calm voice responded. Activity confirmed. He listened. No intervention authorized. The voice continued. Observe only. He closed his eyes briefly. Understood. The line disconnected. When he stepped back into the hallway, nothing appeared different. Nurses charted, machines hummed, but beneath the surface, movement had begun. He passed room 312 once more. The patient slept under sedation. Police officers remained stationed. One laughed at something on his phone. The assistant adjusted the 4-drip rat. Slightly, to maintain stability. Not because it required adjustment, because routine builds cover. As he left the room, he noticed a reflection at the far end of the corridor. A figure disappearing around the corner. Not staff. Posture too controlled. He did not follow. Not yet. Instead, he turned off one overhead light near the nurse's station, creating shadow, reducing visibility from a distance. No one questioned it. Hospitals accept minor inconsistencies without notice. At 3:15 a.m., the elevator paused between floors for 3 seconds longer than normal. He watched the indicator carefully. Patterns were shifting, quietly, deliberately, and no one else in that building felt it yet. But he did, because chaos does not announce itself. It whispers first, and he had learned long ago to listen. The whisper became movement at 4:11 a.m. The trauma pager activated without warning. Multiple GSW, male, unstable, 2 minutes out. The assistant was already walking before the second alert tone finished. The ambulance doors burst open with force. The patient was younger than expected, mid-30s, heavy blood loss, entry wound high abdomen, exit uncertain. 2 paramedics shouted vitals over each other, BP dropping, lost pulse once en route. The assistant did not look at the blood. He looked at the faces. One paramedic avoided eye contact. Fear, not fatigue. Behind the gurney, 2 men followed wearing dark jackets, marked private security. Too coordinated, too calm. Hospitals attract chaos. But these men carried stillness. Inside Trauma Bay 2, the team moved fast. Intubation, compression, rapid transfusion. The assistant handed instruments before requests finished for me. But his attention split. The 2 security men did not remain near the family area. They stood at the edge of the trauma bay doors, watching, not grieving, assessing. One of them spoke quietly into an earpiece. No hospital security had authorized private contractors. He knew that because he had checked protocol last week after noticing delivery irregularities. The attending physician barked, clear the hallway. The assistant stepped out briefly. He approached one of the men. "You cannot stand here," he said evenly. The man looked down at his badge. "We're assigned to protect him. By whom? Family." The assistant held his gaze. There was no family present. Not yet. The man's posture shifted slightly. Hand near jacket seam. Weapon concealed, not hospital standard. The assistant stepped back. Understood. He returned inside the trauma bay. He did not alert staff. Not yet. Inside, the patient coded. Flatline. Charge to 200. Shock delivered. The heart resumed weak rhythm. Temporary. The assistant leaned closer to the surgical field. He whispered to the attending, barely audible, "We should move to or immediately." The attending frowned. "We're stabilizing." "He will not remain stable." A brief pause. The attending studied him, then nodded, prep or one. As the gurney rolled out, the 2 private security men followed. One positioned ahead, one behind, 2 tactical. In the hallway, the assistant adjusted the crash cart path slightly, forcing one of the men to step aside. He measured the man's reaction time. Fast, controlled, trained. Inside or one, the doors sealed. Only authorized personnel allowed. The 2 men attempted to enter. The circulating nurse blocked them. "You cannot come in. We are responsible for his safety. You are not sterile." The assistant stepped between them calmly. "He will be safer inside," he said. The man stared at him for a long second, then stepped back, but he did not leave. Instead, he spoke quietly into his earpiece again. At 4:32 a.m., the first gunshot echoed, not inside the OR, down the corridor, muffled but unmistakable. Screams followed. The surgical team froze. "What was that?" the scrub nurse whispered. The assistant did not answer. He walked to the OR doors and engaged the manual lock override. Protocol rarely used. The attending snapped. "What are you doing?" Securing the room. Another gunshot. Closer. Overhead announcement crackled. Code Silver. Active threat. All units locked down. The hospital shifted instantly from healing to containment. Inside the OR, fear rose. The anesthesiologist's hands trembled slightly. "We have to stop." "No," the assistant said quietly. All eyes turned to him. The word had weight. The attending narrowed his gaze. "We are mid-operation." The assistant nodded. "Exactly." The patient lay open on the table, abdomen exposed, bleeding controlled but fragile. Movement now meant death. Outside the doors, heavy footsteps ran past. Voices shouted. The two private security men were no longer visible through the narrow window. That meant they had moved toward the gunfire, not away from it. The assistant returned to his position. "Continue," he said softly. The attending hesitated, then resumed. Inside the OR, discipline returned in fragments, but the rhythm had changed. Outside, chaos grew louder. Security radios overlapped. Someone screamed for a lockdown of stairwell. B. The assistant registered the detail immediately. Stairwell B. The access panel with fresh scratches. The earlier malfunction alert. This was not spontaneous. It was layered. Planned. At 4:41 a.m., the lights flickered once. Backup generators engaged. Emergency lighting cast the room in colder tones. The assistant adjusted the surgical lamp angle manually. He did not rush. He never rushed. Inside his mind, corridors mapped themselves. Positions calculated. If the intruders aimed to reach this patient, they would approach through the east corridor. Less traffic. Camera blind spot. He stepped to the supply cabinet and removed a portable monitor. He positioned it near the door, angled toward the corridor window reflection. A mirror without appearing like one. He watched movement indirectly. At 4:47 a.m., a shadow crossed the glass. One figure, weapon visible, not hospital security. The assistant spoke calmly. "They are on this floor." The anesthesiologist's breath quickened. The attending's hand slowed. "We cannot leave," the surgeon said. "I know," the assistant replied. The handle on the OR door rattled. Once, then again, a firm knock. "Hospital security," a voice called. The assistant did not move toward the door. He watched the reflection. The shadow's stance was wrong. Too squared, too prepared. He stepped closer to the door but did not unlock it. "State your identification number," he said evenly. "Silence." Then gunfire through the glass panel. The window cracked but did not shatter fully. The scrub nurse screamed. The assistant moved instantly. Not dramatic, not loud. He pulled the heavy stainless instrument cart across the door's interior frame, reinforcing it. He turned off the overhead lights. Only surgical lamp remained, reducing visibility from outside. Another gunshot. The door held. Inside, the surgeon's hands shook now. "We cannot operate like this." The assistant leaned close. "You can." His voice carried no panic, only certainty. Outside, footsteps retreated. They were not trying to breach immediately. They were repositioning. The assistant returned to the table. He resumed passing instruments as if the world beyond the door did not exist. Calm under threat. Controlled breathing. The anesthesiologist stabilized vitals. The bleeding reduced. Time stretched. At 5:02 a.m., a voice came over the hallway loudspeaker. Not hospital staff. "Open the surgical wing. We only want one patient." That confirmed it. Targeted extraction. The assistant's eyes remained on the surgical field. He did not look at the others. Fear would spread if acknowledged. Instead, he whispered to the circulating nurse. "Shut down the electronic door controls manually." She blinked. "How?" He guided her in 3 quiet steps. She followed without questioning why he knew. Metal locks engaged throughout the wing. Temporary, but enough. Outside, boots ran past again. The threat was no longer subtle. It had arrived, fully. Inside the OR, the patient's bleeding finally stabilized. The attending began closing. The assistant's hands remained steady, as if gunfire in hospital corridors was routine, as if lockdowns were expected, as if this moment had been rehearsed long before tonight. And outside the sealed doors, men with weapons were learning something they had not anticipated. The quiet assistant was not panicking. He was preparing. The final suture closed. T5:18 a.m. No one celebrated. The patient remained critical but alive. The attending stepped back, sweat visible beneath his cap. "We move him to recovery," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The assistant was already calculating. Recovery was exposed. Long corridor. Glass partitions. Limited barricade options. "No," he said quietly. The room fell silent again. The attending looked at him sharply. Explain. Recovery is not secure. Another distant gunshot echoed through the ventilation system. Closer now, the anesthesiologist swallowed. He can't stay here. He can for 6 minutes, the assistant replied calmly. That is what we need. For what? The scrub nurse whispered. He did not answer that. Instead, he moved to the OR wall panel and accessed the manual ventilation override. He reduced airflow slightly, not enough to affect oxygenation, enough to muffle internal noise. Then he turned to the circulating nurse. Call ICU. Tell them to clear room 318 immediately. That's isolation, she said. Yes. She hesitated only briefly before moving. Outside the reinforced door, footsteps returned, slower this time, measured. The handle tested again. No gunfire. A voice followed. Open the door. We know he's in there. Calm voice, professional, not emotional. The assistant approached the door without unlocking it. He stood to the side of the frame, not directly in front. What do you want? He asked evenly. You are holding someone who does not belong to you. He belongs to the hospital. A pause. You are an assistant, the voice replied. This is not your responsibility. The words were precise, chosen to belittle. Inside the OR, eyes shifted toward him again. He did not look back. My responsibility is anyone on this table, he said. Silence lingered. Then 3 rapid shots into the lower hinge. The reinforced cart absorbed most of the force. Metal dented but held. Inside, panic rose again. The scrub nurse stepped backward. We can't hold them. The assistant turned toward her. His expression remained steady. Yes, we can. Not loud, not forceful, certain. He stepped to the surgical storage cabinet and removed 2 sterile saline bags. He handed one to the anesthesiologist. If the door breaches, throw this at the lights. The anesthesiologist blinked. Why? To create darkness. Understanding dawned slowly. He turned back to the circulating nurse. ICU ready? Yes. Room 318 cleared. Good. He then did something subtle. He unplugged the surgical lamp from the primary circuit and connected it to portable battery power. Independent, resilient, prepared. Outside, the voice spoke again. We are not here for you. Do not make this worse. The assistant studied the crack in the glass panel, measured the stress points. The hinge would fail after 2 more bursts. He looked at the clock. 5:23 a.m. Timing mattered. He stepped back toward the team. When I say move, we move. The attending stared at him. You are giving orders now? No, he replied calmly. I am protecting your patient. The surgeon hesitated, then nodded once. The door exploded inward with a final shot. The stainless cart toppled but slowed the entry. A masked man stepped through, weapon raised. He expected panic, he expected screaming. Instead, the lights went out. The anesthesiologist reacted instantly, hurling the saline bag toward the overhead fixtures. Glass S. Hattered. Darkness swallowed the room except for a single surgical lamp beam. The assistant had already moved, not toward the intruder, toward the power panel. He killed the remaining overhead circuit. Complete darkness. The intruder fired twice blindly. Bullets struck tile. The assistant did not charge. He did not shout. He moved along the perimeter he had memorized earlier. 4 steps left, 2 forward, low profile. He reached the oxygen cylinder rack and pushed one heavy tank toward the doorway. It rolled across the floor, metal against tile. The intruder fired at the sound. Wrong direction. In the confusion, the assistant closed distance, not for combat, but for leverage. He grabbed the intruder's wrist with controlled force, redirected the weapon downward and drove the man's forearm against the metal doorframe. No dramatic strike, no excessive violence, just physics. The weapon clattered to the ground. The assistant kicked it out of reach and stepped back immediately. He did not pursue, he did not escalate. He positioned himself between the intruder and the operating table. The masked man lunged. The assistant sidestepped and used the intruder's momentum to send him into the stainless cabinet. Impact. Disorientation enough. The assistant pinned him with controlled pressure against the wall. Leave, he said quietly near the man's ear. Boots pounded in the hallway, more incoming. The assistant released the intruder abruptly and stepped back. He allowed him to retreat. The man stumbled out of the room, retrieving nothing. Gunfire erupted again in the corridor. Different direction. Law enforcement engaging. Inside the OR, silence fell except for breathing. The scrub nurse stared at the assistant. You. He raised a hand slightly. Not now. He turned to the surgeon. We move. The team lifted the patient onto the transport gurney. The assistant opened the secondary rear access door, rarely used, leading toward a maintenance corridor few staff remembered. "How do you know about that exit?" the anesthesiologist whispered. He did not answer. They moved quickly but not chaotically, through dim corridors, around blind corners. He walked slightly ahead, scanning intersections before signaling movement. At one corner he paused abruptly, held up one finger, footsteps approaching from the left. He adjusted the route immediately, guiding them right instead. No explanation, only motion. They reached ICU room 318 at 5:31 a.m. Door sealed, isolation engaged. The patient transferred successfully. Vitals unstable but present. The assistant locked the ICU door from the inside. For a moment, everyone simply breathed. The attending looked at him differently now, not as furniture, not as background. "You've done this before," the surgeon said quietly. The assistant met his gaze. "I've worked in hospitals before." It was not an answer. Outside, sirens grew louder, police perimeter tightening. The initial wave of attackers had failed to extract the target, but the threat had not ended. It had shifted. And in that ICU room, among exhausted medical staff and humming machines, something had changed permanently. They no longer saw him as just an assistant. They saw discipline. They saw control. They saw restraint. But they still did not understand what he truly was, and he intended to keep it that way. ICU room 318 felt smaller than it was. Isolation doors seal. Ed. Negative pressure humming. One guarded window facing the interior corridor. The patient lay motionless beneath pale light. Monitors traced fragile lines of survival. Outside, sirens multiplied. Inside, fear compressed into silence. The assistant stood near the door listening, not to the noise, to the gaps between it. Gunfire had stopped for now. That meant repositioning, not retreat. The attending surgeon removed his gloves slowly. "You overstepped," he said, but without anger. "Yes," the assistant replied. The surgeon studied him. "You were right." A brief nod passed between them. No more discussion. The anesthesiologist approached quietly. "There are at least 3 attackers confirmed. Security is down on the west stairwell. Police are requesting floor status." The assistant processed the layout mentally. West stairwell compromised. East corridor partially exposed. ICU wing isolated but temporary. "They will attempt vertical access," he said. "Through the roof?" the nurse asked. "Or lower maintenance levels?" "How do you know?" She pressed. He met her eyes briefly. "They are organized. That was all." His phone vibrated once. He ignored it. Instead, he moved toward the ICU equipment bay. He began repositioning, not dramatically. Subtly. He shifted 2 heavy ventilator backups to narrow the doorway angle. He relocated a metal supply cart near the nurses' station intersection. He unplugged one rolling diagnostic monitor and checked battery charge. Full, good. The charge nurse approached. "What are you doing? Creating delay?" She swallowed. "We're medical staff." "Yes." "That means we don't fight, correct?" She frowned. "Then what are we doing?" He looked at her, Ev. "Enli. We are protecting patients." That was not the same as fighting. A loud impact echoed from somewhere below. Not gunfire, metal against concrete. The assistant stepped into the hallway briefly. Police officers rushed past the far intersection. "Clear the 3rd floor," one shouted. He watched their formation. Loose, uncoordinated under pressure. Brave, but reactive. He returned to ICU 318. Inside, the patient's heart rate spiked suddenly. Stress response. Even unconscious bodies sense chaos. He adjusted the IV sedation carefully, measured dose, not excessive. Stability over suppression. The nurse observed his precision. "You're very calm," she said quietly. He did not respond. Because calm was not emotion, it was discipline. Another impact shook the hallway doors, this time closer. A security guard stumbled past the ICU window, bleeding from the shoulder. The assistant opened the isolation door halfway, pulled the guard inside quickly, locked it again. He applied pressure to the wound efficiently. Entry graze, not fatal. "You shouldn't be here," the guard gasped. "Neither should you," the assistant replied. He secured the wound with sterile compression and tightened a makeshift sling. Stay seated. Conserve energy. The guard stared at him. Who are you? He did not answer. Instead, he listened again. Bootsteps, slow, measured, not police, not hospital, approaching from the east corridor. He moved toward the nurse. Lights off. She obeyed instantly now. The ICU dimmed to emergency strips. The hallway beyond glowed faint blue. Two shadows appeared at the far end, weapons raised, searching. One spoke into a radio. They moved him. Floor 3 east, the assistant's step. D. Back from the window's line of sight. He calculated angles. Distance to intersection, 20 meters. Obstacles, limited. Time before engagement, under 30 seconds. He turned to the attending. Take them through the secondary oxygen corridor. That's restricted. Yes. The surgeon hesitated, then moved. The assistant unlocked the internal ICU rear access. A narrow service hallway used for equipment transfer. Rarely remembered. As staff began guiding other patients quietly away from the front corridor, one nurse froze. There's an elderly patient in 316. Vent dependent? He closed his eyes briefly. One main crisis. Protect the target. Protect civilians. Choice. He moved toward room 316 without hesitation. Inside, the elderly woman lay fragile beneath tubing. No ability to move. No awareness of danger. He disconnected the portable ventilator from the wall unit and switched to battery backup. Checked oxygen pressure, sufficient for 12 minutes. He rolled the bed carefully into the service hallway. Slow, silent. Behind him, footsteps entered the ICU main entrance. Voices. They were here. He did not rush. He positioned the elderly patient behind a structural column in the rear corridor. He adjusted her blanket, then stepped back toward the ICU doorway alone. One attacker moved cautiously down the hallway, weapon scanning. The assistant stepped into partial view deliberately. Hands visible, empty. You are too late, he said calmly. The attacker paused. Where is he? Gone. The man advanced 2 steps. The assistant remained still. No aggression, no fear. Move, the attacker ordered. Instead of resisting physically, the assistant shifted slightly to block the direct. T-path toward the rear corridor. Small angle, subtle. The attacker misread it as hesitation. He lunged forward. The assistant stepped aside at the last second, guiding the attacker's momentum into the wall-mounted supply rack. Metal crashed loudly. Disorientation again. He removed the magazine from the attacker's weapon in one smooth motion and tossed it across the corridor, then stepped back. He did not strike. He did not pursue. The attacker scrambled backward, stunned. Sirens intensified outside. Police boots thundered on the stairwell now, reinforcements arriving. The second attacker shouted from down the hall, "Fall back!" The first retreated, leaving behind the useless weapon. The assistant kicked it away and returned immediately to the rear corridor. Staff and patients were already halfway down, orderly, controlled. No stampede. He guided them the final distance to a sealed maintenance elevator rarely used. The surgeon stared at him as doors closed. You knew exactly where to move. Yes. How? He met his gaze. I pay attention. The elevator descended. Temporary safety. Back upstairs, law enforcement flooded the ICU wing. Commands shouted. Clearances confirmed. But the attackers were not captured. They had slipped away through maintenance access points, exactly as anticipated. At 6:02 a.m., silence returned in fragments. Police officers moved room to room. The assistant walked back toward ICU 318 alone. He re-entered the room, reconnected equipment, restored lights gradually. Normalcy layered back over tension. The charge nurse approached him slowly. You disarmed a man. Yes. You could have hurt him. Yes. But you didn't. No. She searched his face. You chose not to. He looked at the unconscious patient. Violence complicates control. That answer unsettled her more than anything else. Moments later, a senior police commander entered ICU 318, eyes scanning. He stopped when he saw the assistant. Recognition flickered. Small, controlled, but real. The commander gave the slightest nod, professional, acknowledging. Then he turned to the surgeon. We will secure the building. The assistant stepped back into shadow. No introduction, no explanation. He resumed adjusting IV flow rates, returning equipment to standard positions, erasing evidence of tactical geometry. By 6:30 a.m., The hospital announced partial containment. Media helicopters circled overhead, but inside ICU 318, quiet discipline remained. The crisis had not ended, it had evolved. The attackers failed to extract their target. Now they would escalate, and somewhere beyond the hospital walls, decisions were being made about intervention, about authority, about him. He checked his phone finally. One new message: stand by for escalation protocol. No signature, no explanation. He deleted it again. Then he returned to his post beside the patient, invisible, prepared, waiting. By 7:10 a.m., daylight pressed against the hospital windows. Morning shift staff had arrived to flashing lights and police barricades. Inside, controlled movement resumed. Outside, the situation hardened. The assistant stood in ICU 318, reviewing the patient's vitals. Stable, but fragile. Sedation maintained. Blood pressure borderline. The room felt temporary, like a shelter in a storm that had not finished forming. A police officer entered quietly. They breached the lower maintenance core. "Rideau," he said to the surgeon. "They're not gone." The surgeon's jaw tightened. "How many?" "Unknown." The assistant listened without turning. Unknown meant fluid. Fluid meant dangerous. His phone vibrated once. He did not check it immediately. Instead, he stepped into the hallway. Police presence had increased, but formation remained defensive, reacting, not anticipating. The charge nurse approached him again. "There are rumors they're threatening other patients," she said. "Which wing?" he asked calmly. "Pediatrics." The word changed the air. The assistant's expression did not shift, but something behind his eyes did. He moved toward the central corridor. A police sergeant intercepted him. "You need to stay in your assigned area. There is movement toward Pediatrics," the assistant replied. "We have officers there. You had officers here." The sergeant stiffened. "Are you questioning command?" "No." The assistant held his gaze evenly. "I am questioning positioning." The sergeant hesitated. Then his radio crackled. Shots fired. "Second floor north. Pediatrics." The assistant did not wait for permission. He moved, not running. Purposeful. As he reached the stairwell, he checked his phone quickly. One message. Authority approval pending. Delay external intervention. He locked the screen. Delay. That meant this was still contained. For now. On the second floor, panic had returned. Nurses pushing children into rooms. Parents crying. Police trying to establish perimeter. At the far end of the hallway, two armed men stood near the nurse's station. One fired a shot into the ceiling. Not to kill, to control. "We want safe exit," one shouted, "and access to the surgical putty." Ent. Leverage. The assistant stepped into view slowly. Hands visible. Empty. One attacker turned his weapon toward him. "Stop there." He stopped. Distance maintained. "You are escalating," the assistant said evenly. The attacker laughed once. "You think this is escalation?" The second attacker grabbed a young nurse and pulled her forward, weapon near her shoulder. The hallway froze. Police held position. No clean angle. The assistant calculated instantly. Distance, 15 meters. Line of sight, obstructed. Hostage too close. He did not move closer. He lowered his tone. "You are not leaving this building alive if you fire another shot." It was not a threat. It was a statement. The attacker narrowed his eyes. "You a cop?" "No." "Then shut up." The assistant shifted slightly to the side, creating a clearer angle for the officers behind him. Subtle, intentional. The attacker adjusted his aim. Tracking him. Good. Focus diverted from police. "Your target is alive," the assistant continued calmly. "If you kill anyone here, your leverage ends." The hallway remained silent. The hostage trembled. The attacker's grip tightened. "You think I care about leverage?" The assistant watched his breathing. Rapid, unstable, less trained than the first group. Escalation tier. He made a decision. Moral before tactical. He took one slow step forward. Weapon shifted toward him fully now. Police tensed. "Release her," he said quietly. The attacker laughed again. "You volunteering?" "Yes." The word landed heavy. Police glanced at him sharply. The attacker hesitated. He had expected fear, negotiation, not substitution. "You don't even matter," the attacker said. "I do," the assistant replied. "Still." "Ence." The attacker studied him, measured something, then shoved the nurse away roughly and grabbed the assistant instead. Gun pressed against his ribs. The hallway inhaled sharply. The assistant did not resist. He allowed himself to be positioned between the attackers and the police, human shield, but upright, balanced. The attacker began backing toward the stairwell. "We move," he barked. The assistant felt the weapon pressure increase. He calculated timing. Not yet. Police followed at distance, controlled. The stairwell door opened, dim concrete chamber beyond. The attacker dragged him down 2 steps. That was enough. Inside confined space, angles narrowed. The assistant shifted his weight subtly. He hooked his heel against the stair edge and dropped suddenly. The attacker stumbled forward. Grip loosened. In one fluid motion, the assistant rotated under the man's arm, redirecting the barrel toward the concrete wall. The shot fired harmlessly. He struck the attacker's wrist once, sharp, precise. Weapon dropped. He kicked it down the stairs and stepped back immediately. He did not continue striking. He did not punish. He created space. Police surged forward and secured the attacker. The second assailant fled upward but was intercepted by officers on the landing. Within seconds, both were restrained. The stairwell fell quiet except for heavy breathing. The sergeant stared at the assistant. "You're not hospital security." "No." "You military?" The assistant looked down the stairwell. "No." The answer was technically true. He walked back into the pediatric hallway. Parents stared at him. Children cried. The nurse he had exchanged places with stood frozen. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "Yes," he replied softly. He did not elaborate. Upstairs, the surgeon met him near the ICU wing. "You could have been killed." "Yes, why?" He met the surgeon's gaze. "Because she would have been." That ended the conversation. But escalation had changed shape. The attackers had shifted tactics. Hostage leverage instead of extraction. They were losing patience, which meant command outside the hospital would lose patience soon as well. At 7:52 a.m., the building trembled faintly, not explosion, rotor wash, distant but unmistakable. The assistant closed his eyes briefly. It had begun. The next phase. He looked at the surgeon. "Keep him stable," he said, nodding toward ICU 318. "Where are you going?" the surgeon asked. He did not answer directly, back to work, because for him, escalation was not chaos, it was transition, and somewhere above the hospital roof, something powerful was approaching, not for spectacle, for control. The quiet assistant adjusted his gloves once more, and prepared for what came next. The sound came first as a tremor, not loud enough to panic the building, not yet. Just a low vibration that unsettled the fluorescent lights, and sent a faint rattle through the upper windows of the surgical wing. Inside operating room 3, the assistant paused mid-motion, a clamp held steady in his gloved hand as he finished clearing the tray from the aborted procedure. His expression didn't change, but his eyes lifted slightly toward the ceiling. He knew that sound. Outside, the thud-thud-thud of rotor blades grew stronger. Down the corridor, nurses began to murmur. Someone whispered, "Is that a helicopter?" It circled once, not landing. Assessing. The armed man in the hallway, the threat leader, stiffened. His grip tightened around the hostage, a young orderly barely 20, face drained of color. The muzzle of the handgun pressed harder into the boy's temple. "Who called them?" The man snapped. No one answered, because no one knew. The assistant stepped into the corridor slowly, hands visible, posture relaxed but deliberate. The other staff parted without realizing they were doing it. He didn't look at the helicopter. He looked at the gunman. "You don't want that aircraft landing," the assistant said calmly. It was the first time anyone had heard his voice carry like that. Not quiet, not hesitant. Measured, projected. The gunman barked a laugh. "You think I'm afraid of backup?" "Yes," the assistant replied evenly. "You should be." The helicopter dipped lower, wind now visible through the far windows as debris lifted from the rooftop helipad. The assistant understood the escalation curve better than anyone in that building. External tactical intervention meant layered containment, snipers, breach teams, jurisdictional confusion, panic, crossfire in sterile corridors not designed for it. Hospitals were death traps during dynamic entries. He couldn't allow it to reach that point. The threat leader dragged the hostage backward toward the central nurses' station, knocking over a cart. "Tell them to leave," he shouted. The assistant didn't move closer. He adjusted his angle instead, subtly shifting so that he had line of sight not only to the gunman but to reflections in the glass medication cabinet behind him. Positioning. "Listen carefully," the assistant said. His tone dropped half a register. "Not low. Uda, but heavier. Command without aggression. If that helicopter lands, you lose control of this situation. The gunman's eyes flicked upward as the shadow of the aircraft passed across the ceiling. You still have options, the assistant continued, but only if you slow this down. The hallway felt smaller now, compressed by pressure. You're some kind of negotiator. The gunman sneered. No, the assistant said, a beat, but I understand consequences. The helicopter made its final circle and began its descent toward the rooftop. The threat leader's breathing quickened. His control was thinning. Panic was close, and panic was lethal. Then he did the worst possible thing. He pulled the hammer back. The metallic click cut through the corridor like a scalpel. Gasps erupted. A nurse began to cry. The assistant stepped forward. Not rushed, not dramatic, one step. The movement drew the gunman's eyes. You shoot him, the assistant said evenly, and the people in that aircraft stopped negotiating. Silence. Rotor wash thundered above now. The assistant held eye contact, unblinking, steady, no adrenaline in his voice. The gunman hesitated, and for the first time, he wasn't in control of the room anymore. The assistant was... You want to walk out of this alive, the assistant said quietly. Then you listen to me. The helicopter touched down, and inside the hospital authorities shifted, not with force, but with presence. The helicopter's landing didn't sound triumphant. It sounded procedural, a heavy controlled settling of weight onto reinforced concrete. No spotlight sweep, no dramatic descent of ropes, just rotors winding down into a steady, disciplined idle. Inside the corridor, the gunman heard it too. His breathing sharpened. The hostage whimpered. The assistant did not look toward the roof. His focus remained locked forward, posture balanced, weight distributed evenly as if he were standing on unstable ground. You still have time, he said. The gunman's jaw twitched. They're coming in. Yes, the assistant replied. But they haven't breached. That word landed. Breached. The assistant watched the man's eyes track the hallway intersections, calculating, imagining armored figures flooding the building. That aircraft isn't your enemy, the assistant continued. Your own panic is... The gunman's grip faltered slightly. Just a fraction. The assistant took another slow step, not closing distance recklessly, but adjusting angle again. He positioned himself between the gunman and the long reflective glass panel along the wall, denying peripheral awareness. Reducing variables. You're surrounded, the gunman snapped. No, the assistant said calmly. You are... Footsteps sounded faintly from the stairwell access at the end of the hall. Controlled, synchronized, not rushed. The assistant heard them, counted them, federal. The hospital's overhead speakers crackled to life briefly, then cut out, likely overridden by incoming command authority. The assistant spoke again before the gunman could spiral. Look at me. The command was soft. The gunman hesitated, but he did. Focus on one voice, the assistant said. Mine. Outside the hallway doors, unseen by most, a federal tactical element had entered the building. No shouting, no chaos, clean movement, controlled stacking at corridor intersections. The assistant knew their patterns. He also knew they were watching. A glint of glass at the far end confirmed it. Optic reflection. Overwatch had sightline but not a clear shot. Too much risk to the hostage. The gunman shifted, dragging the orderly tighter against him. The barrel pressed harder. Tell them to back off, he demanded. The assistant tilted his head slightly, as if considering. They will not move until I tell them this is stable. The gunman blinked. You? He scoffed. The assistant didn't answer directly. Instead, he spoke a single line. Measured, precise, pitched just slightly louder. Level 3 containment. No dynamic entry. The words seemed ordinary. But down the hall, unseen operators froze their advance. One of them touched his earpiece. A quiet response came through encrypted channel. Copy. Holding. The gunman didn't understand what had just happened, but something had shifted again. The assistant stepped closer. Within 3 meters now, still hands visible, shoulders relaxed, no aggressive posture. You don't want to hurt him, he said, nodding toward the hostage. You're overwhelmed. Don't psychoanalyze me, the gunman barked. I'm not, the assistant replied evenly. I'm giving you an exit. The hostage's knees trembled. The assistant noticed a tremor in the gunman's forearm, muscle fatigue setting in, adrenaline spike nearing crash. Timing mattered. The assistant's eyes flicked briefly, not at the gunman but past him, a subtle shift in shadow at the corner intersection. Two operators repositioned silently, adjusting angle per the assistant's containment instruction. They weren't taking over, they were deferring. The assistant inhaled once, slow, then he changed cadence. "You're losing. Strength in your right arm," he said quietly. "Your grip will fail before you expect it to." The gunman's eyes widened involuntarily. "You fire accidentally and that ends you." A pause. "You lower the weapon voluntarily," the assistant continued, "and this stays survivable." The rotor noise above diminished further as engines powered down. The building felt still, compressed. The gunman swallowed. His arm trembled harder now. The assistant stepped into the final phase. "You don't need the gun anymore." His voice wasn't forceful. It was certain. Behind the gunman, an operator shifted slightly, enough to signal readiness, but not enough to trigger panic. The assistant saw it in peripheral vision. He spoke one final coded line: "Medical priority Alpha. Secure and stabilize." Down the corridor, the federal team leader responded quietly into comms. "Understood." The gunman's arm gave, not dramatically, not in surrendering theatrics, just a gradual sag as exhaustion overtook fear. The assistant moved first, one controlled step inward, guiding the barrel downward with precise pressure at the wrist joint. Not a strike, not a takedown, just redirection at the exact moment muscle fatigue peaked. The weapon lowered. In the same breath, federal operators flowed in, smooth, disciplined, overwhelming but not chaotic. The gunman was restrained in under 4 seconds. No shots fired. The hostage collapsed into sobs but was unharmed. The assistant stepped back immediately as tactical agents secured the corridor. No nods, no acknowledgement. One operator paused beside him briefly. Their eyes met, a fraction of a second. Recognition, respect, no words. The team leader spoke quietly into his shoulder mic. Package contained. Casualties minimal, then softer, almost private. Control retained. The assistant turned away before anyone could address him. He removed his gloves and walked back toward operating room 3. As if the most dangerous moment of the day had simply been another task completed. The silence after controlled violence is never truly silent. It hums, not with danger, but with what almost happened. The hallway that had held a gunman minutes earlier now carried only the soft murmur of federal agents documenting positions, photographing sight lines, marking evidence. Yellow indicators were placed discreetly on the floor. A weapon bag was sealed. Radios crackled in low, disciplined tones. No one raised their voice. Hospitals had their own gravity. Even tactical units respected it. The assistant stood at the scrub sink inside operating room 3, washing his hands again. Slowly, methodically. There was no blood on them. But there had been adrenaline in the air, and that lingered. Through the small square window in the OR door, he could see shadows passing, dark tactical silhouettes against pale hospital walls. The contrast was stark, military green against medical blue, authority intersecting with care. He dried his hands and returned to the stainless steel instrument table, forceps, scissors, needle holders. He inspected each one under the bright surgical light, checking alignment and tension as if nothing had occurred. Downstairs, the helicopter remained on the rooftop helipad. It had not come for extraction. That detail spread quietly through administrative channels first. The aircraft wasn't an emergency response, it was protocol. When certain classified operational assets were potentially compromised or exposed, oversight arrived automatically. The assistant knew this without asking. He also knew it meant paperwork. In a secured conference room on the 3rd floor, federal supervisors met with hospital executives. Voices were calm, measured. Words like containment, cooperation, and federal jurisdiction were used with bureaucratic precision. One question surfaced repeatedly. Who is he? The answer was never direct. He is attached to a joint tactical medical operations unit. What does that mean? It means today's outcome was favorable. No rank was stated. No unit named. The hospital director, pale and visibly shaken, pressed further. Is he military? A pause. He is cleared. That was all they would get. Back in the corridor, staff gathered in small clusters. Shock manifested. Differently in each of them. One nurse replayed the moment the gun's hammer clicked in her mind, over and over. A surgical resident sat against the wall, staring at his hands. The young orderly who had been taken hostage was wrapped in a thermal blanket, despite the building's steady temperature. A counselor knelt beside him, speaking softly. And threaded through all of it was a single, disorienting realization. The quiet assistant had been in control the entire time. He told them what to do, someone whispered. I saw it, another replied. They listened. Why didn't he tell us who he was? There was no answer to that, because invisibility had been the point. An hour later, a single operator in subdued tactical uniform approached the scrub room. He did not knock. He waited until the assistant finished aligning a tray. You're cleared, the operator said quietly. The assistant nodded once. No further exposure? He asked. Contained. Body cam restricted. Internal review only. A pause. They're curious. They'll get over it, the assistant replied. The operator studied him for a moment, not as a subordinate studies a superior, but as a professional assesses another. You could transfer out, the operator said. After this. The assistant's gaze returned to the instruments. No. Another pause. Understood. The operator hesitated, then added, softer, minimal casualties. The assistant gave the smallest nod. That was the objective. No handshake followed. No salute. The operator left the same way he'd entered, quietly. As dusk approached, the helicopter finally powered up again. Staff gathered near windows to watch it lift from the rooftop. There was no dramatic ascent, just a controlled rise, a pivot and departure into fading light. It had come not to extract a hero, but to confirm a boundary. Inside the OR, the assistant adjusted the overhead light arm and resumed sterilization logs. His handwriting was neat, unremarkable. The door opened slightly. A nurse stepped inside. She was one of the few who hadn't frozen earlier, the one who had continued, guiding patients into locked rooms during the standoff. She held herself steady now, but her eyes carried weight. I just wanted to say... She stopped, recalibrating. He waited. Thank you. The words were simple, unadorned. He met her gaze briefly. You did well, he said. She blinked. I was terrified. So was he, the assistant replied, nodding faintly toward where the gunman had stood earlier. Fear is predictable. She studied him, searching for something. Pride, maybe. Recognition. She found neither. Are you going to tell anyone? She asked quietly. No. Why? He considered the question longer than expected. Because this hospital doesn't need a headline, he said. It needs stability. She absorbed that. After a moment, she gave a small nod and stepped back toward the door. Still, she said gently, I'm glad you were here. When she left, the room felt still again. The assistant returned to his work. Clamp tension test. Passed. Scissor alignment. True. He placed each instrument in its designated slot with precision that bordered on ritual. In another part of the building, administrators drafted carefully worded internal memos. Incident resolved. External support assisted. Ongoing counseling available. Nowhere did they mention command. Nowhere did they mention that federal tactical units had deferred to a man in scrubs.